In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Romeo Ville, the night was unusually calm. The air was still, the streets were deserted, and an unsettling silence hung in the atmosphere. At 512 Concord Avenue, a sense of unease began to ripple through the stillness. The Bartow household, typically vibrant and full of life, stood ominously silent. Zoraida Bartow, her husband, and their 2 children had not made any contact with loved ones for an unsettling period. This unusual silence stirred worry in Zoraida's mother, who could no longer ignore the gnawing concern that something was amiss. As the minutes ticked by, the sense of foreboding grew, compelling Zoraida's mother to reach out to the local authorities for a welfare check. Officers responded promptly, arriving at the address with a mix of caution and urgency. The scene that greeted them was nothing short of eerie. The house stood in shadow, its exterior bathed in the faint glow of a single porch light. The contrast between the warm glow and the dark, looming structure created a striking image of desolation. As officers approached the front door, their footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual, each step amplifying the tension in the air. They knocked, the sound reverberating through the stillness, but there was no answer. Peering through the windows, they could see no signs of movement. The house was eerily still, as if time had come to a standstill within its walls. The officers' calls went unanswered, and their initial knocks turned into more urgent bangs. Still, there was no response. The decision was made to enter the premises, driven by the need to ensure the safety of those inside. As they stepped inside, the chill of the unknown washed over them. The house, now illuminated by their flashlights, revealed a stillness that was almost unnatural. Furniture stood undisturbed, yet an inexplicable tension hung in the air. It was then that the officers noticed the first signs of distress. 2 lifeless dogs lay in the entryway, their presence adding a layer of confusion and concern. This discovery propelled the officers further into the house, driven by a sense of duty and an increasing sense of dread. The living room, typically a space of family gatherings and laughter, showed signs of a struggle. A TV and a coffee table were knocked over, hinting at a violent confrontation. With every step deeper into the house, the officers' apprehension grew. Each room they passed seemed to hold its breath, awaiting their discovery. The silent house had a story to tell, a narrative of fear, violence, and mystery that was slowly unraveling before their eyes. As they continued their search, the officers were painfully aware that they were on the brink of uncovering something profoundly tragic. The house held its breath, each silent room revealing a deeper layer of an unfolding nightmare. What they were about to uncover would send shockwaves through the quiet community, forever altering the lives of those involved. As the search progressed, the weight of the silence grew heavier, each creak of the floorboards adding to the mounting tension. The officers moved with cautious determination, every corner turned revealing more about the ominous events that had transpired. The air inside the house was thick with anticipation, a haunting stillness that spoke volumes about the darkness lurking within. The officers' flashlights cast long shadows on the walls, their beams cutting through the oppressive darkness. Each step taken echoed with a sense of foreboding, the silence amplifying the gravity of the situation. As they moved deeper into the house, the true extent of the tragedy began to reveal itself. What started as a routine welfare check was rapidly transforming into a scene of horror and heartbreak. In the living room, the first harrowing sight awaited them. Alberto Roland, a man once full of life, lay motionless on the floor. The sight of his lifeless body, marred by gunshot wounds, was a stark and chilling reminder of the violence that had occurred. The officers' breaths caught in their throats as they processed the scene before them. The living room, which should have been a sanctuary of comfort, had been transformed into a tableau of tragedy. With heavy hearts and resolute minds, the officers pressed on. Each room they entered told a story of its own, a piece of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. In a bedroom, they found Zoraida Bartow, her life cruelly and violently cut short. The signs of forced entry into the room suggested a struggle, a desperate fight against an unrelenting fate. Her presence, or rather, the absence of her vibrant spirit, was a piercing testament to the horror that had unfolded. And then, the most heartbreaking discovery of all, the children. Diego and Adrielle Roland, innocent lives taken far too soon, were found murdered. The sight of their lifeless bodies was a devastating blow, a reminder of the innocent lives caught in the crossfire of a senseless act of violence. The officers were left to grapple with the enormity of the tragedy, their hearts heavy with sorrow and their minds racing to comprehend the events that had led to such a catastrophic loss. As the officers pieced together the evidence, the narrative of the night's events began to take shape. The house, once a home filled with love and laughter, had become the stage for a nightmarish tragedy. The officers' determination to uncover the truth was unwavering, their resolve strengthened by the need to bring justice to the victims and their grieving loved ones. The darkness that had descended upon 512 Concord Avenue was profound, but within it lay the flicker of hope for resolution and justice. What was meant to be a routine check had turned into a discovery of unspeakable horror, a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on all who encountered it. The officers' journey through the silent house was a testament to their dedication and courage in the face of unimaginable circumstances. The echoes of that night would linger, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. As they exited the house, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon them, the officers knew that their work was far from over. The investigation had only just begun, and the path to uncovering the full truth would be long and arduous. But with every step taken, they edged closer to understanding the depths of the tragedy that had befallen the Bartow family. The story was only beginning to unfold, a chilling tale of love turned deadly and lives irrevocably altered. As the officers delved deeper into the residence, their initial sense of unease escalated into a palpable dread. The hallway, dimly lit by the sparse streetlights filtering through the curtained windows, seemed to stretch on endlessly, every shadow concealing potential horror. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls, hinting at the untold stories of that fateful night. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the wooden floorboards under their cautious steps. It was in this thick, almost tangible silence that they came upon the grim sight of two lifeless dogs. These faithful companions, often seen as guardians of the household, lay motionless, their presence now a poignant reminder of the brutality that had occurred. The officers' hearts sank, the sight of the dogs adding a deeper layer of sorrow and urgency to their mission. Driven by a mix of duty and the overwhelming need to uncover the truth, they pressed on. The decision to enter the home under exigent circumstances was not made lightly but was now deemed absolutely necessary. The officers knew that time was of the essence, and any hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Inside the home, the scene was one of chaos and violence. The living room, once a haven of family activities and shared moments, was now a tableau of devastation. The television lay on its side, the screen cracked, while the coffee table was overturned, its contents scattered across the floor. This was no ordinary break-in, the signs of a violent struggle were glaringly evident, and the officers could almost hear the echoes of the desperate fight that had taken place. Their flashlights swept across the room, revealing more signs of the chaos. Picture frames lay shattered, their glass fragments glinting ominously in the flashlight's beam. Family photos, once cherished memories captured in time, were now strewn across the floor, trampled and torn in the fray. Each photo told a story, a moment of happiness now starkly contrasted by the surrounding devastation. The officers could sense the violent and chaotic energy that had permeated the home, the struggle between hope and despair, life and death. As they moved through the living room, their careful steps led them to the hallway that connected the different parts of the house. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, each step amplifying the growing tension in the air. With every door they approached, the officers braced themselves for what they might find behind it, their breaths shallow with anticipation. The first room they entered was a bedroom, its door slightly ajar. The sight that greeted them was chilling. The once tidy room was now a scene of disarray. The bedclothes were tangled and partially hanging off the bed, indicating a struggle had taken place. Drawers were pulled open, their contents scattered haphazardly. The officers' flashlights caught sight of broken glass on the floor, and it was clear that a desperate fight had unfolded here. But the most heart-wrenching discovery awaited them in the children's room. Diego and Adrielle Roland, innocent lives cruelly and brutally extinguished, lay in their beds as if in eternal slumber. The sight of their lifeless bodies was a punch to the gut, a stark and horrifying reminder of the senseless violence that had descended upon this home. These children, whose lives were meant to be filled with dreams and laughter, had become victims of an unimaginable tragedy. The officers stood in silent mourning, their hearts heavy with sorrow and rage at the injustice of it all. Each discovery within the home painted a picture of a family torn apart by violence and fear. The house, once a place of love and joy, was now haunted by the echoes of a horrific night. The officers' minds raced with questions, the need to understand what had happened and why driving them forward. The deeper they delved into the house, the more complex and troubling the narrative became. What they had initially thought might be a simple welfare check had turned into a dark and twisted tale of love, betrayal, and murder. As they moved towards the master bedroom, their sense of foreboding grew. The room was eerily quiet, the door slightly ajar. They pushed it open, the hinges creaking in the silence, and were met with a scene of brutal finality. Zoraida Bartow lay lifeless on the bed, her body bearing the marks of a desperate and violent struggle. The signs of forced entry were evident, and it was clear that she had fought valiantly against her assailant. The officers could almost hear her cries for help, the echo of a fight for survival that had ended in tragic defeat. Zoraida's presence, even in death, was a powerful reminder of the vibrant woman she had been. Her loss was a blow to the community, and the officers could feel the weight of that loss pressing down on them. They knew that they had to get to the bottom of this mystery, to uncover the truth behind the horrific events that had transpired. The house, now a crime scene, held many secrets, and it was their duty to unravel each one, no matter how painful or shocking. As the officers continued their grim exploration, piecing together the fragments of the nightmarish puzzle, they were acutely aware of the enormity of their task. Each room, each discovery, added another layer to the story, a story that was far from over. The tragedy that had befallen the Bartow family was a stark reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of everyday life, a darkness that the officers were now determined to confront and bring into the light. As the officers continued their grim exploration, they moved methodically through the house, piecing together the tragic narrative that had unfolded. The deeper they went, the more the full extent of the horror became clear. Their flashlights cast long shadows on the walls, revealing a home that had been transformed into a scene of unimaginable violence. In the living room, the sight that greeted them was nothing short of devastating. Alberto Roland lay on the floor, his body riddled with gunshot wounds. The once vibrant and strong man, whose presence had filled the room with warmth and laughter, was now lifeless. The brutality of his death was starkly evident, and the officers could almost hear the echoes of the gunshots that had ended his life. Each wound told a story of desperation and terror, a brutal testament to the violence that had erupted within these walls. Alberto's presence in the living room, the heart of the home, was a poignant reminder of the life that had once flourished here. The room, now marked by chaos and bloodshed, bore the scars of a violent confrontation. The officers' hearts were heavy with the weight of the tragedy, their minds racing to understand the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Their journey through the house took them to the master bedroom, where Zoraida Bartow's body lay. The signs of forced entry were evident, and it was clear that a fierce struggle had taken place. Zoraida had fought valiantly against her attacker, her final moments marked by a desperate bid for survival. The officers could almost feel the intensity of the struggle, the clash between life and death that had played out in this room. Her presence, even in death, was a powerful reminder of the love and strength she had embodied in life. Zoraida's loss was a blow to the community, and the officers could feel the weight of that loss pressing down on them. Her death, marked by such violence and brutality, was a stark reminder of the darkness that had descended upon the Bartow family. The officers knew that their task was far from over, and they pressed on with a renewed sense of determination. The most heart-wrenching discovery awaited them in the children's room. Diego and Adrielle Rowland, innocent lives cruelly and brutally extinguished, lay in their beds as if in eternal slumber. The sight of their lifeless bodies was a punch to the gut, a stark and horrifying reminder of the senseless violence that had descended upon this home. These children, whose lives were meant to be filled with dreams and laughter, had become victims of an unimaginable tragedy. The officers stood in silent mourning, their hearts heavy with sorrow and rage at the injustice of it all. The room, once a sanctuary of childhood innocence, was now a scene of unspeakable horror. Toys lay abandoned on the floor, their bright colors a stark contrast to the grim reality that had unfolded. The officers could almost hear the echoes of laughter that had once filled the room, now replaced by an eerie silence. Each toy, each piece of clothing, was a reminder of the vibrant lives that had been tragically cut short. As the officers pieced together the evidence, the narrative of the night's events began to take shape. The house, once a home filled with love and laughter, had become the stage for a nightmarish tragedy. The officers' determination to uncover the truth was unwavering, their resolve strengthened by the need to bring justice to the victims and their grieving loved ones. The darkness that had descended upon 512 Concord Avenue was profound, but within it lay the flicker of hope for resolution and justice. What was meant to be a routine check had turned into a discovery of unspeakable horror, a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on all who encountered it. The officers' journey through the silent house was a testament to their dedication and courage in the face of unimaginable circumstances. The echoes of that night would linger, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. The investigation was now in full swing, with the officers meticulously documenting every detail of the crime scene. They took photographs, collected evidence, and made notes, each piece of information adding to the growing picture of the tragedy. The house, once a place of joy and warmth, was now a labyrinth of clues and evidence, each room holding a piece of the puzzle. Outside, the night had grown darker, the stars obscured by a blanket of clouds. The officers worked tirelessly, driven by a sense of duty and the need to uncover the truth. Their minds raced with questions, the need to understand what had happened and why driving them forward. The deeper they delved into the house, the more complex and troubling the narrative became. What they had initially thought might be a simple welfare check had turned into a dark and twisted tale of love, betrayal, and murder. The community of Romeo Ville was in shock. News of the tragedy spread quickly, and the small town was gripped by a sense of fear and disbelief. The Bartow family was well known and well loved, and the loss of their lives was a blow to the entire community. The officers felt the weight of the town's grief and anger, their determination to solve the case growing stronger with each passing moment. As the investigation continued, the officers knew that they had to remain focused and methodical. Each piece of evidence, no matter how small, could be crucial in solving the case. They worked tirelessly, driven by a sense of duty and the need to bring justice to the Bartow family. The house, now a crime scene, held many secrets, and it was their duty to unravel each one, no matter how painful or shocking. The tragedy that had befallen the Bartow family was a stark reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of everyday life, a darkness that the officers were now determined to confront and bring into the light. The story was only beginning to unfold, a chilling tale of love turned deadly and lives irrevocably altered. The investigation was far from over, and the path to uncovering the full truth would be long and arduous. But with every step taken, the officers edged closer to understanding the depths of the tragedy that had befallen the Bartow family. The darkness that had descended upon 512 Concord Avenue was profound, but within it lay the flicker of hope for resolution and justice. The investigation was gaining momentum, and the next step was to follow the leads provided by the evidence collected. The detectives had uncovered a trail of text messages that hinted at a deeper, more sinister plot. These messages, exchanged between Zoraida and Nathaniel, painted a picture of an affair shrouded in deceit and manipulation. Armed with this information, the detectives set out to interview Ermelinda and Nathaniel, hoping to uncover the truth behind the tragedy that had unfolded at 512 Concord Avenue. Their journey took them to Ermelinda and Nathaniel's residence, a modest home that belied the turmoil brewing within. The detectives approached the house with a sense of resolve, their minds focused on the task at hand. They knocked on the door, and after a moment, it was opened by Ermelinda, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As the detectives introduced themselves and explained the purpose of their visit, Ermelinda's demeanor shifted. She invited them inside, her initial politeness masking the tension that lay beneath the surface. The detectives could sense that there was more to her story, and they were determined to uncover it. They began by presenting the evidence they had gathered, including the text messages that revealed the affair between Zoraida and Nathaniel. Ermelinda's reaction was one of feigned surprise, but the detectives noticed a flicker of something else in her eyes, a mix of guilt and fear. She attempted to downplay the significance of the messages, insisting that they were nothing more than harmless flirtation. But as the detectives pressed on, presenting more evidence, it became clear that Ermelinda was hiding something. Nathaniel, who had been in another room, joined the conversation. His presence seemed to embolden Ermelinda, but it also revealed the dynamic between them. Nathaniel's influence over Ermelinda was palpable, and it became evident that she was not acting on her own. The detectives observed this carefully, noting the subtle ways in which Nathaniel guided Ermelinda's responses and controlled the narrative. The detectives decided to take a different approach, addressing Nathaniel directly. They confronted him with the evidence, laying out the timeline of events and the text messages that tied him to the affair with Zoraida. Nathaniel's response was guarded, his demeanor calm but defensive. He denied any involvement in the tragic events, insisting that his relationship with Zoraida had been purely emotional and had never escalated to anything more. Ermelinda, meanwhile, seemed to struggle with her emotions. Her initial cooperation began to wane as the weight of the evidence and the detectives' questioning bore down on her. It was clear that she was torn between her loyalty to Nathaniel and the overwhelming guilt she felt for her involvement in the affair. The detectives could see the cracks in her facade, and they pressed on, determined to break through the layers of deceit. As the interview continued, the detectives revealed more about their findings. They had discovered traces of spyware on Zoraida's phone, indicating that someone had been monitoring her communications. This revelation seemed to hit Ermelinda hard, and her composure began to crumble. She glanced at Nathaniel, seeking his reassurance, but his expression remained cold and unyielding. Realizing that Ermelinda was on the verge of breaking, the detectives shifted their focus back to her. They spoke gently, urging her to tell the truth and unburden herself from the weight of her secrets. They emphasized the importance of justice for the Bartow family and the need to bring the perpetrators to account. Ermelinda's eyes filled with tears, and she seemed to waver, torn between her loyalty to Nathaniel and her desire to do what was right. It was then that Ermelinda made a fateful decision. She began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted the events leading up to the tragedy. She revealed that her jealousy of Zoraida had driven her to desperate measures. She had used catfishing tactics to manipulate Nathaniel, convincing him that Zoraida was a threat to their relationship. Ermelinda admitted to planting the spyware on Zoraida's phone, using it to monitor her every move and fuel Nathaniel's anger. Nathaniel's reaction was immediate and furious. He tried to silence Ermelinda, but the detectives intervened, ensuring that she could continue her confession. Ermelinda explained how she had orchestrated the murders, using Nathaniel as her pawn. She had manipulated him into believing that the only way to protect their relationship was to eliminate Zoraida and her family. The detectives listened intently, their expressions a mix of shock and determination. As Ermelinda's confession unfolded, the detectives could see the depth of her manipulation and the extent of Nathaniel's influence over her. The tragic events that had taken place at 512 Concord Avenue were not the result of a simple crime of passion, but a calculated and premeditated act driven by jealousy and control. The full extent of the tragedy became clear, and the detectives knew that they had a long road ahead to bring justice to the Bartow family. The interview with Ermelinda and Nathaniel marked a turning point in the investigation. The detectives had uncovered the truth behind the tragedy, but their work was far from over. They needed to gather more evidence, build a solid case, and ensure that those responsible were held accountable. The road ahead was challenging, but the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. The community of Romeo Ville watched with bated breath as the investigation unfolded. The Bartow family's story was one of love turned deadly, a tragic reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. As the detectives continued their work, the town was united in their grief and determination to see justice served. The investigation would continue, but the truth was now out in the open. The detectives had uncovered a web of deceit, manipulation, and murder, and they were committed to bringing those responsible to justice. The story of the Bartow family tragedy was far from over, but the path to resolution had begun. As Ermelinda's confession unfolded, the detectives listened intently, their pens scribbling down every detail. The weight of her words hung heavily in the room, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Ermelinda, her voice wavering, began to unravel the twisted tale of jealousy and manipulation that had led to the tragic events at 512 Concord Avenue. Ermelinda revealed that her jealousy of Zoraida had been festering for months. What had started as a harmless flirtation between Nathaniel and Zoraida had quickly spiraled into a dangerous obsession. Ermelinda couldn't bear the thought of losing Nathaniel, and her desperation drove her to extreme measures. She had used catfishing tactics to create a fake online persona, one that she used to monitor and manipulate Zoraida's interactions with Nathaniel. Through this fabricated identity, Ermelinda had gained access to Zoraida's personal life, her fears, and her vulnerabilities. The detectives could hardly believe the lengths to which Ermelinda had gone. She had installed spyware on Zoraida's phone, allowing her to read private messages, track her movements, and listen to her conversations. This invasive surveillance gave Ermelinda a sense of control, but it also fueled her paranoia and jealousy. Each interaction between Zoraida and Nathaniel, no matter how innocent, was twisted into evidence of betrayal in Ermelinda's mind. Ermelinda's manipulation of Nathaniel was equally chilling. She had preyed on his insecurities, convincing him that Zoraida was a threat to their relationship. Through a calculated mix of lies and half-truths, Ermelinda had stoked Nathaniel's anger and fear. She had painted Zoraida as a manipulative seductress, someone who would stop at nothing to steal Nathaniel away. The emotional and psychological toll on Nathaniel was immense, and he became increasingly dependent on Ermelinda for guidance and support. The detectives could see the picture becoming clearer. Ermelinda had orchestrated the entire plot, using her catfishing tactics and spyware to manipulate both Zoraida and Nathaniel. Her jealousy had driven her to the brink, and she had crossed the line from obsession to violence. Nathaniel, caught in the web of her deceit, had become her unwitting accomplice. The realization of the depth of Ermelinda's manipulation was staggering. As Ermelinda's confession continued, she described the events leading up to the murders in chilling detail. She had carefully planned every step, using her access to Zoraida's phone to monitor her movements and ensure that the timing was perfect. On the night of the tragedy, Ermelinda had convinced Nathaniel that it was time to act. She had fueled his anger and desperation, pushing him to believe that the only way to protect their relationship was to eliminate Zoraida and her family. Nathaniel, already teetering on the edge, had succumbed to Ermelinda's manipulation. He had entered the Bartow home, armed and driven by a mix of fear and rage. The confrontation had been brutal and swift. Alberto Roland had been the first to fall, his attempts to protect his family ending in tragedy. Zoraida, despite her fierce resistance, had been overpowered. The children, Diego and Adriel, had been caught in the crossfire, their young lives cut short by the senseless violence. Ermelinda's voice quivered as she recounted the final moments. She described how Nathaniel, consumed by his actions, had turned the gun on himself. The realization of what he had done, combined with Ermelinda's betrayal, had pushed him to the brink. In a final act of desperation, he had taken his own life, leaving Ermelinda to face the consequences of her actions alone. The detectives were left reeling from Ermelinda's confession. The depth of her manipulation, the cold calculation of her actions, and the tragic consequences were almost too much to process. They knew that they had uncovered a dark and twisted tale, one that would leave a lasting scar on the community of Romeo Ville. The Bartow family tragedy was a stark reminder of the destructive power of jealousy and the lengths to which some would go to protect their twisted sense of love and loyalty. The investigation was far from over. The detectives needed to corroborate Ermelinda's confession with the evidence they had gathered. They would have to dig deeper into the digital trail left by the spyware, analyze the text messages, and piece together the timeline of events. The case would require meticulous attention to detail and unwavering determination. The community of Romeo Ville, still reeling from the shock of the tragedy, awaited answers. The Bartow family's story had become a rallying point, a symbol of the need for justice and closure. The detectives felt the weight of this responsibility and were committed to seeing it through. They would leave no stone unturned, no question unanswered, in their quest to bring justice to the victims and their families. The story of the Bartow family tragedy was one of love turned deadly, a chilling tale of jealousy and manipulation that had left a trail of heartbreak and loss. The detectives knew that their work was far from over, but they were driven by a sense of duty and a commitment to uncovering the truth. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but they were prepared to face it head-on. As Ermelinda was taken into custody, the full extent of her actions began to sink in. She had orchestrated a tragedy that had claimed multiple lives, and now she would have to face the consequences. The detectives, their resolve strengthened by the gravity of the case, knew that they had a duty to see justice served. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were prepared to follow it to the very end. The investigation into the Bartow family tragedy was a testament to the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. It was a story of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of jealousy and manipulation. The detectives were determined to bring this dark chapter to a close, to uncover the truth and ensure that those responsible were held accountable. The community of Romeo Ville, united in their grief and determination, stood behind them, ready to support their efforts and seek justice for the victims. As the investigation progressed, the detectives turned their focus to Nathaniel's workplace, a local hardware store where he had been employed for several years. The store, a familiar fixture in the community, was usually bustling with customers and employees. On this particular day, however, a sense of unease hung in the air. The detectives' arrival had not gone unnoticed, and there was a palpable tension among the staff. Nathaniel was busy stocking shelves when the detectives approached him. His initial reaction was one of surprise, quickly masked by a veneer of calm. The detectives introduced themselves and explained that they needed to speak with him about the ongoing investigation. Nathaniel's demeanor shifted slightly, a flicker of apprehension crossing his face. The detectives began by asking Nathaniel about his relationship with Zoraida and the nature of their interactions. Nathaniel's responses were measured and guarded. He admitted to knowing Zoraida and acknowledged that they had communicated, but he insisted that their relationship had never gone beyond casual conversation. The detectives, however, had already seen the text messages that suggested otherwise. The conversation then turned to Nathaniel's phone, a crucial piece of evidence in the case. The detectives explained that they needed to secure his phone to examine the messages and other data it contained. Nathaniel's reaction was immediate and defensive. He resisted the request, insisting that there was nothing of importance on his phone and that he had already deleted any messages that might be relevant. The detectives remained calm but firm. They explained the importance of the phone as evidence and reassured Nathaniel that they were simply following protocol. Nathaniel's resistance only heightened their suspicions, and they pressed on, determined to secure the phone for analysis. The tension in the air was palpable, the stakes of the conversation clear to both parties. Realizing that further resistance would only arouse more suspicion, Nathaniel reluctantly agreed to cooperate. He handed over his phone, but not without a final attempt to downplay its significance. As the investigation continued, the detectives remained vigilant, following every lead and uncovering new layers of the complex web of jealousy and manipulation. The community of Romeo Ville, still reeling from the shock of the tragedy, watched with bated breath, hoping for answers and closure. The Bartow family's story had become a rallying point, a symbol of the need for justice and the importance of uncovering the truth. The detectives knew that their work was far from over, but they were driven by a sense of duty and a commitment to bringing justice to the victims and their families. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but they were prepared to face it head-on. The story of the Bartow family tragedy was a stark reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of everyday life, and the detectives were determined to confront that darkness and bring it into the light. The investigation into the Bartow family tragedy was a testament to the resilience and determination of the detectives. They had uncovered a twisted tale of jealousy and manipulation, and they were committed to ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. The community of Romeo Ville, united in their grief and determination, stood behind them, ready to support their efforts and seek justice for the victims. As the forensic team continued their work, the detectives prepared for the next steps in the investigation. They would need to interview more witnesses, analyze additional evidence, and build a solid case that could withstand the scrutiny of the legal system. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were prepared to follow it to the very end. The story of the Bartow family tragedy was far from over, but the path to resolution had begun. The detectives, driven by a sense of duty and a commitment to uncovering the truth, would leave no stone unturned in their quest for justice. The darkness that had descended upon 512 Concord Avenue was profound, but within it lay the flicker of hope for resolution and justice. The community of Romeo Ville, still reeling from the tragedy, awaited answers and closure, united in their desire to see justice served. As the investigation intensified, the detectives faced an unexpected twist. Ermelinda was reported missing, her disappearance adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate case. The news spread quickly, raising alarm within the community and among law enforcement. The detectives knew that finding her was crucial, not only to prevent further tragedy but also to ensure that justice was served. The search for Ermelinda extended across state lines, with law enforcement agencies collaborating to track her down. Leads were followed, tips were investigated, and surveillance footage was scrutinized. It was during this exhaustive search that the breakthrough came. A tip-off led the detectives to a Walmart parking lot in Catoosa, Oklahoma, where Ermelinda and Nathaniel were spotted. The scene at the Walmart was tense, the presence of police vehicles and officers creating an atmosphere of urgency. The officers approached the vehicle cautiously, their eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Inside the car, Ermelinda and Nathaniel were locked in a heated argument, their faces marked by fear and desperation. As the officers moved closer, the tension reached a breaking point. Nathaniel, in a panic, started the engine and attempted to flee. The vehicle sped through the parking lot, weaving erratically as it tried to escape the pursuing police cars. The chase was fraught with danger, the car careening around corners and narrowly avoiding collisions. The pursuit came to a sudden and violent end when the car lost control, crashing into a barrier. The impact was severe, the vehicle crumpling under the force. Almost immediately, smoke began to billow from the engine, quickly followed by flames. The officers, fearing for the occupants' safety, rushed towards the burning vehicle. As they approached, gunshots rang out, echoing through the night. The sound was a chilling reminder of the escalating danger. The officers, trained for such high-stress situations, moved in with caution, their focus on neutralizing the threat. Inside the car, the scene was one of chaos and tragedy. Nathaniel was found dead, a self-inflicted gunshot wound ending his life. His face bore a look of despair, a tragic reflection of the inner turmoil that had driven him to such an end. Ermelinda, too, was gravely injured, a gunshot wound to her chest indicating that Nathaniel had turned the gun on her before taking his own life. The officers moved swiftly, pulling her from the burning vehicle and calling for medical assistance. The aftermath of the crash was a scene of devastation. The wreckage smoldered, the flames casting an eerie glow on the surrounding area. The officers worked to secure the scene, their minds grappling with the enormity of what had just transpired. The pursuit of Ermelinda and Nathaniel had ended in the most tragic of ways, their lives snuffed out in a final act of desperation. As Ermelinda was rushed to the hospital, her condition critical, the detectives reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. The story of the Bartow family tragedy had been marked by jealousy, betrayal, and calculated murder. Ermelinda's confession had revealed the depths of her manipulation, and Nathaniel's actions had shown the devastating impact of that manipulation. The investigation concluded with the tragic end of both suspects, bringing a somber closure to a case that had shaken the community of Romeo Ville to its core. The Bartow family tragedy was a stark reminder of the darkness that could lurk within the human heart, and the lengths to which some would go to protect their twisted sense of love and loyalty. In the days that followed, the community mourned the loss of the Bartow family and grappled with the revelations that had come to light. The detectives, their work now complete, turned their focus to supporting the community and ensuring that the lessons learned from this tragedy would not be forgotten. The story of the Bartow family tragedy, with its harrowing twists and turns, served as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in the face of darkness. The detectives had uncovered a tale of love turned deadly, a chilling narrative of jealousy and manipulation that had left a trail of heartbreak and loss. As the community of Romeo Ville began to heal, the memory of the Bartow family lived on, a poignant reminder of the need for compassion, understanding, and justice. The detectives, having fulfilled their duty, knew that their work had made a difference, bringing a measure of closure to a tragedy that had forever altered the lives of those involved. The Bartow family tragedy was a story that would be remembered for years to come, a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked jealousy and the devastating consequences of manipulation. The detectives, having brought the truth to light, could take solace in the knowledge that their efforts had brought justice to the victims and their families. As the final chapter of the investigation closed, the community of Romeo Ville came together, united in their grief and determination to honor the memory of the Bartow family. The story of their lives and the tragedy that had befallen them served as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the importance of seeking justice, even in the face of overwhelming darkness.